In 2012, I talked about the Hopi Indians in Arizona. And a lot of native cultures like the Hopi, one of the main reasons for their practices is to change the weather. And it may be that people like the Hopi chose to live in like very subsistence level environments, like deserts and high mountains, because in those kind of environments you had to be in a kind of like flawless connection to spirit, creator, elemental forces, so that you could, bring changes in weather conditions for your own survival. So there's a Cambridge anthropologist, Peter Whiteley, who, seems from his approach about as skeptical empiricist as you could get. He wrote several books about the Hopi, and he said that, when he was living with the Hopi, there were things about their world that he couldn't explicate or explain through any of his cultural ways of understanding things. For instance, sometimes he would go to visit a Hopi with a list of questions, and one of the Hopi elder, and the elder would answer all of his questions in a row without him asking a single question. Like sometimes they would just have like a telepathic knowledge of the information that he was trying to extract from them. But then he also said that sometimes he would go to their rain dances, their kachina dances, and it would be a clear blue sky, blazing hot sun, and 120 degrees. They would dance for 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Clouds would gather and rain would start to fall. Okay, and that for me I think is true. I mean, I think from my own experiences with shamanism, from a lot of anecdotal evidence that I've picked up, humans actually have the capacity to transmute elemental conditions around them using shamanism, using with the capability of concentrating psychic energy through ritual and ceremony and creating a container for that. Is it possible that we could do that on a planetary level? Could if we were kind of harmonized as a global collectivity of mind, could we take control in a certain sense, or at least master these kind of climate crises that we've unleashed on the planet? So I think that that's possible. And it may be that we've created this disasters, when the earth changes, we created some of them at least. It may be that that's a way of forcing us to access these other powers of the human psyche that have been, almost like too much for us to deal with or think about, And so for me, that's very much like the theme of my book, 2012, is this idea that the shamanic practices of these indigenous cultures and the mystical knowledge of Eastern cultures could synthesize and synergize with Western technical knowledge, our ability to apply solutions on a meta level, and if those things can come together quick enough, we might be able to offset or even undo a lot of these cataclysmic changes that are coming towards us. I put that out as a hypothesis. I clearly don't know. I mean, there's definitely a lot of reason to suspect that we're going to see a lot of really hard natural conditions in the next few years, and but I also would just see that hopefully as a kind of the Hopi talk about it as purification. So like we're going to have to release a lot of what, maybe everything that we've been holding on to as, ego, possession, projection of who we think we are in the world or whatever. And it's that humbling that is going to allow us to advance to this next level of being and consciousness. I'll try to be funny in my next answers. I apologize for it. It's also a little bit like a cartoon, right, the whole thing?
Thank you. What you just said rings true to me. And actually back, 4 or 5 years ago, when I used to stay up late at night and listen to coast AM radio, they did a couple of weather control experiments that succeeded so well that the host got pretty freaked out and sort of backed off. He was afraid he was starting a new religion, I think. But it was obvious they have like 5 to 7 million listeners, and he had them all focus on a weather pattern in Texas and change it. And then again, there was one in Vancouver, and they were able to change both of them. And so I think as we move forward, we're moving into realizing not only that we all share a consciousness, but that all things are conscious. The sun is a conscious being, and obviously cares for us because of the way he's cooling down a little, or she is cooling down. But I wanted to ask you a specific question, and that's about salvia, which I believe I've heard that Dr. Phil is about to do a program, sort of a hysterical program on the use of salvia. So I'm a little concerned about the fact that I know it's been misused and used recreationally, although I don't worry about it too much, because I think you only use salvia once recreationally, and then you learn that it's not a recreational thing to do. But anyway, I wondered if you'd talk a little about your experiences. Thank you.
Everybody here know what Salvia Divinorum is? Much? What's that? Okay, so I mean, there's the class of traditional psychedelic substances, the tryptamines, and what's the other one? Phenethylamines or something, that include mescaline from the peyote cactus, ayahuasca, which contains DMT or dimethyltryptamine, which is used in the Amazon rainforest, LSD, obviously, which is there's a whole range of psychedelics. And then in the 60s, the anthropologists found, maybe it was in the 50s, found this really odd and unique plant used by the Mazatec Indian shamans, which they named Salvia Divinorum. And it's a square-stemmed plant from the mint family that apparently it never produces seeds, so it's only a cultigen. And so they found it in a handful of gardens of Mazatec shamans in the region of Oaxaca. And the Mazatecs would use it. They also used the mushrooms a lot, but they would either use the salvia when the mushrooms weren't available, or they would use it along, with the mushrooms in different respects. And they talked about its spirit being very shy, that if you laughed during a ceremony, you would frighten away the spirit of the salvia. And they also would never smoke it. They would make a fresh cigar of the leaves and eat them, then hold the liquid under their tongues. So in the 60s, I guess, we discovered salvia in the West. People started bringing it here, finding ways to cultivate it, and then extract it, create stronger and stronger doses of it. Now, the active ingredient, salvinorin A, is the most potent psychoactive molecule that we found in nature. LSD is also powerful in microgram doses as a salvinorin A, so those are really the only two that we know. And then salvinorin A is also a totally different class of chemical. It's not a tryptamine, doesn't seem to have a relationship to serotonin. I don't think we really know yet how it works. The experience of salvia is very distinct if you smoke it or if you do it in some way that's similar to the way the Mazatecs would use it. I've only had a very limited number of experiences with it. I smoked an extract of it once, and it was like a freak-out experience where, first of all, it's you're looking out at the world, and suddenly it's almost as if all of the patterning and everything you're seeing has another reality kind of concealed behind it that's kind of coming in almost at an orthogonal relationship to your present or current reality. That's how I experienced it, and other people have noted that too. It's very mysterious, very, it reminds me of Castaneda's ideas in some respects. And so that first experience was the shocking feeling of this aggrieved, angry kind of female spirit had suddenly been called in and was sort of shocking my system. Later on, I had a few other experiences with it, but the best experience I had was taking a sublingual extract, which you hold under your tongue, which is much more similar to the way the Mazatecs would do it, as they wouldn't smoke it. And at that point, it was a longer, more empathic experience. At that point, I was processing material about my father's death, and it really felt like this female spirit came back in, but as a healing and nurturing energy that actually helped me kind of process emotions around my father and my father's death. And I cried and felt kind of blessed by that experience. So for me, what we've done with salvia is the same disastrous thing that we keep doing with everything that we touch. We've got the Western culture has the Midas touch. So we look for the boost. The kind of we hypertrophy the agent. And so we create extracts, 10x, 20x, and then we smoke it. I mean, Kat Harrison, Terence McKenna's widow, who works with the Mazateks, says that the Mazateks would never smoke salvia because it was a water-loving plant that doesn't like to be burned or dried out. You just wouldn't do that. So when we then put it in our head shops around the country, giving people no warning about what this thing is, and have teenagers smoking it up, of course it's going to have some negative effects. Now, I still think, as with any of these teacher plants, they come into our world as for reasons that are their reasons, and so there's a guided process where they're taking care of us, more than we're taking care of them, So this whole experience that our Western culture has now had with salvia is probably important also. It's been a first access point to the psychedelic experience for a lot of people. It just hasn't been handled well or properly, but maybe in the future we'll correct that, and as with all of these teacher plants, we'll come into right relationship with them, I have a friend, Morgan Brent, who also used to work with Terence McKenna, and his way of languaging the psychedelic plant realm is to talk about them, not as drugs or psychedelics, but as teacher plants. And he has a construct that, our tendency has been to think about, the human species, we're the kings of nature, we're the top of the food chain, we're at the top of the pyramid of life, we're so amazing, but if you were to squash down that pyramid and see it more as like a circle or as a community of life, we're actually the youngest species on the planet, in some ways the least developed. And, we've only been around 150,000 years or something, Homo sapiens, I think. So, we're still on our kind of initiatory hero's journey, our search as a species to figure out where we fit into the larger community of life. And we have this sentience, this capacity to transform, but we don't necessarily know how to use it properly. So we've gotten lost on that journey. And so these teacher plants have a role. They were kind of like, according to Morgan, and I think it's a beautiful way to think about it, it's like the community of plant sentience got together. They're a much older, community on the planet. And they're like, okay, we're going to deputize certain of you plants to go and talk to this younger species and help them get back on the right path, So that's what these teacher plants do and are for. And I think, for me, that's definitely been the experience when you work with mushrooms or iboga or ayahuasca or peyote. They're kind of like giving you these very strong messages and giving you this look at yourself as a kind of, holistic, whole system matrix, what your behavior is doing to yourself, the people around you, the planet itself, and then giving you an opportunity to, make those changes, Animal intelligence on 2012. I don't know how you would do that because they don't tend to think in our kind of historical time cycles. But I'm definitely interested in dolphin communication. I really like that John Lilly, who worked with dolphins in the 60s, he would try to figure out what their language is, like what they're communicating to each other all the time. And basically they swim in these groups, they all play together, make love with each other and so on. And apparently what he ended up hypothesizing what their language is infinite gradations of relationship. Like all these subtle nuances defining the interpersonal and group relationships of the dolphins as they move around together. I really love that. I mean, I think I was just talking with somebody outside about, for me, a lot of our problems stem from our language and the limitations in our language. And our language has a lot of biases inscribed in it. So I think like part of this evolution in consciousness is becoming, much more aware of language and how, because basically like we perceive, and our ability to perceive is very small. Like we perceive a very small level of bandwidth of reality. And so we are narrative beings, we're constantly constructing narrative and stories, and our language is a web of metaphors. There's story actually in our language, so if you talk about understanding something, that means that you're standing over it to understand it, So already there's a hierarchical relationship in that notion of understanding. So our Western language, because we went down this road of hierarchy and dominance, we have a lot of, relations inscribed within our language that make it very difficult for us to get into right relationship with the world. I gave a talk with this Lakota Indian guy, and he had really amazing things to say about this stuff. Like he talked about how he said like it really was painful for him even to try to use our language or to use it all the time because in his language they didn't even have a word for I or me, and he said that the whole concept of living on the earth is totally anathema to like the Lakota people who would think about living with the earth. The earth is not something that you're standing on top of, it's something that you're living with, that's part of you,